Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of Belonging, Imperial's One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, where we try to get a candid conversation about how they develop their sense of identity and their sense of belonging. And it's a real privilege this week that we have Consolata Ndungu. And Consolata is a engagement officer. She's so much more. She's got such a fascinating story. And I just really want to say, Consolata, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and ask you to give us that first, I'm going to ask that first question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about what it is or what it was that gave you your sense of identity, sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Sure, thank you for having me, Wayne. Hi everyone, my name is Consolata. So I guess I'll start way back. My family is from Kenya. I was born and grew up there. I moved to the UK when I was 10, but before that I spent a year because my dad got a job in the Pacific. And throughout all that time, I'd say my sense of belonging, first it was instilled to me, I think, from my parents, having been people who left their home country. I think retaining elements of that culture and encouraging us to be people of service. I'm also inspired by my faith, and that wherever I've gone, that's helped me feel like a sense of, okay, I'm still grounded, and I can still be much of myself. I've now lived in the UK for longer than I was in Kenya, so I think I feel like a hybrid of, Kenyan, British, worldly type of person. So yeah.
So you mentioned you were born in Kenya, and that you were there until you were 10. During those formative years, what was it about Kenya which you enjoyed growing, when you look back and remember?
I think it definitely has to be the community and the social community aspect. I mean, it's funny because when we first moved to this country, we were very surprised, because even amongst family, friends and things, you would need to have made an appointment to see them. Whereas in Kenya, like after church, you just go, or in our culture, just say, I've come to borrow tea, but obviously in the local vernacular language. You're not borrowing tea, you're just coming to have tea and have a chat and gather with people. So it was funny because like after church on Sundays, we'd never have nowhere, we'd always have somewhere to go. But when we came here, it was like you're quite shut off and you have to work quite hard to develop that community around you. Which is important. And I think when we were in Kenya, and then we moved here, we learned there are definitely bits that are very different. So the family culture. So I have quite a large extended family. My parents are one of 7 or 8 on both sides. So quite a lot of aunties and uncles and then cousins, and things were very communal. And then coming here, it was very much, you don't visit someone just like that. You have to have an appointment. There are times when it would be a little bit frustrating when you'd be in the middle of something, people would visit. But, you just get on with it because it's that community, that culture of you're there for each other and you'll help each other throughout things as well.
So do you miss that element of kind of like just anybody can just drop in on you? Do you miss that kind of like communal spirit?
Sometimes there are times when we're like, we haven't seen so-and-so in a while. But back then, because you'd have like a regular roster of people just dropping in, you wouldn't feel like it was completely wild. Whereas here, I've tried, even amongst my friends, we tried to have fairly regular social gatherings, even if not necessarily going somewhere fancy, or even, you know, throughout the pandemic, having group calls just to keep that element of community. There are definitely benefits of, you know, being organized. Like I said, there are times when you maybe not be too keen on people to drop in on you and you're in the middle of something, because then you'd have to entertain, and, you know, whether making tea or making dinner. And part of it was also, it didn't matter whether, you know, all you had was, you know, rice and stew or something simple, as long as just that sharing. And I remember my grandma, you know, she'd always have a pot of tea going, because she had a farm, and people used to just come and say, oh, I've just come to talk to you, and there'd always be tea. So that culture of, you're always there to like converse and commune with other people, is something that, you know, tried to still have here, but it's different.
So community was very much a heart of who you were,
Yeah.
of everybody would look after you. Everyone would know you, I suppose.
To an extent. And I think it's that, you know, even in like the estate, like it was funny too when we came here and we realized we didn't really know our neighbors. Yes, over the years you get to know your neighbors and so on and so forth. But in Kenya, although that's also changing, you know your neighbors, you know your neighbor's family, and your neighbor's family knows your family. And, you know, it's that extended community social gathering that is missing. I know we got a bit of that in the UK through the pandemic, I think, when people realized you are your neighbor's keeper. You know, you can't just sit back and expect nothing. Like, you know, we have a responsibility to each other. So that definitely, I see the benefit of that from having grown up in Kenya.
So, I suppose you also mentioned that your father moved to the South Pacific when you were about 10ish. Okay. How
Yeah,
was
so
that 9, 10ish? How and you stayed there for a year or 2 years? How long?
yeah, we were there for a year. We went to, my dad was working in a country called Vanuatu, which is not far from Australia, or Fiji.
Mhm.
And then we moved out there for a year before he got his next job and we moved here. I think for us, that was the beginning, us being me, my mum, my siblings, was the beginning of our international adventure, because my dad had been quite used to traveling for work. And for a period before we joined him, he'd been working and living on his own. That diaspora thing of having a parent working far away and staying in touch via various means, was there from quite early on. And then we moved, and that kind of changed our outlook and opened, or changed my outlook and opened my eyes to more of the world. I think before moving, you know, you're in this bubble, and where you're used to what you're used to, and you don't know much beyond that. But once we traveled, I mean, it was the first time for us that we'd gone so far with an aeroplane, and that was surreal. The journey at that time took like 2 days. I remember my dad, like, he emailed my mum instructions, you know, in an A4 sheet, because back then there was no WhatsApp, you know, there was telephone calls were expensive. They just had to trust and have faith and believe that it was all going to work out. So
What did you find when you were there, having moved from Kenya?
yeah,
How what was the cultural differences that you felt at the time, and how have they influenced you, or have they even influenced you?
I would say yes, I've definitely been influenced. When there was only 1 year, it was quite transformational, because Vanuatu, so we lived in the main island, which is called Afate, in the capital, Port Vila. Um, I went to the international school on the island. So for me, that was the first time I was in an environment that was very, very diverse and
Mhm.
very inclusive, you know, as a, a culture of, I don't know whether it's international school culture, because everybody's from different parts, you know, there's so many different stories, and you felt welcome from the beginning. You know, I was asked, what do you want to be known as? You know, which
Mhm.
is now, you know, something that's quite common in today's lexicon, but this was
Mhm.
2004. And so my name in Vanuatu is not the name many people call me now. It's like my family nickname.
Mhm.
Um, Also, island life was very relaxed. Like, you know, it was, yes, things happen, but also because it stays quite warm and quite hot. So a lot of activity happens earlier in the day.
Yeah.
In the afternoon, people are fairly chilled. Vanuatu's consistently been rated as one of the happiest places to be. It
Mhm.
is, you know, there are concerns obviously with climate change and everything that islands like those might not are going to struggle over coming years. But it was really idyllic time. You know, school would start at 7:30, finish at 2. We'd go and play, you know, have play dates, go to the beach. The television station coming from Australia would only come on at 6 p.m. and then switch off at midnight. So that was your window for watching TV. Before that, you were out and about, you know. Whereas by the time we moved here, my sister, who was only a few years younger, um, TV was more common like throughout the day.
Yeah.
So it was a very idyllic time. And I think from that time, I got to be not very chilled, but quite calm. You know,
Yeah.
things are going to be all right. You know, island living, it's great.
So when you made the transition from Vanuatu to, did you come here or did you go elsewhere? You mentioned about doing a little bit of traveling, or was it straight from Vanuatu? Was your dad then commissioned to come to the UK? And how was that transition for you?
So when we finished in Vanuatu, saying goodbye was hard. I think because we'd had the experience of saying goodbye in Kenya, it was like, oh, we'll see you soon, not knowing, you know, never been back since. But
Yeah.
um, and then so we had a chance to go back home to Kenya for a month, and then we moved to London. And I remember we arrived on January 8th, 2004, and it was snowing. And it was the first time we'd ever seen snow. And the sun was out, but it was cold. We had jackets on, and we went to Hyde Park as one of our first trips, and we built snowmen, and that was weird, you know, built snowmen because I just come from somewhere where it was sand and beaches.
Yeah.
To suddenly seeing snow. I mean, the most we got in Vanuatu was like earthquakes and tremors, which are quite common. Um, didn't experience earthquakes here. Um, you know, and then snowmen. And then, so the transition was also a bit hard because I came towards the end of the primary school years, so adjusting to a new school environment. But credit to my parents, I think that's the time that was most ideal in terms of when you're fairly young, it's easier to make transitions and
Yeah.
try to make friends or adjust. Because when you're older, you're a bit more set in your ways. Naturally, it was a bit hard because, you know, this different kid from Kenya, you know, my accent was all over the place, and
Mhm.
adjusting to playground living or playground life when I hadn't really experienced that here
Yeah.
was very different.
Yeah.
You know, you transition and you go through the growing pains of childhood and youth.
Yeah. So apart from going from what 37-degree temperatures down to -2 as soon as you arrived, right?
Yeah,
And then those transitions in the school year, how,
yeah.
from the kind of like a community perspective, you'd gone from where you had aunts, uncles, a big social network, community
Mm,
network, and then
mm.
you're here in the UK, and I suppose even on Vanuatu. Um, what was it like in the fact that you didn't have that community around you, potentially, or was it that you didn't have the community around you?
So I mean, back in Vanuatu, because because it's a fairly small island country, there's lots of international people. So it felt like everybody is in similar positions. As in parents coming to do various jobs, and the children are going to school. So it was always like, oh, where are you from? There was acceptance of different. So we had that community. Obviously, it's not family and traditions
Mhm.
different. Vanuatu, a lot of people, the majority of the population in Vanuatu is also Black. And so that didn't feel too different
Mhm.
to coming to the UK, which is a predominantly white country at the time, and adjusting to new cultures and the British sensibilities and politeness. There was a little bit of a Kenyan community, and my parents got in touch and made friends, which was very nice because you get to at least know people who can show you the ropes a bit. My mum makes a joke now, but one of the first family friends we made gave them an A to Z, because back then sat navs and Google Maps wasn't what it was.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the most practical gifts to receive in a new country. And you know, till up until maybe 2010, we used to print out directions and then read them out and use the A to Z. So I could
Mhm.
actually navigate quite well.
Yeah.
But in the community aspect, I think we got to know a few Kenyan families, which was lovely. And then also, you know, by virtue of going to school, you start making friends. And that was also um, very beneficial to that sense of community and getting to know people.
Mhm.
And then also the fact that there's different types of people in London. I
Mhm.
think I now London is very quite diverse relative to other parts of the UK, and I do appreciate that, because it gets you to see lots of different things. So I think having made that transition from Kenya to Vanuatu to here, you just like learn to know that people are mostly the same. You just might look a bit different or do things slightly differently.
Okay, I really like the way that you've painted the picture of the um, differences in the community and
Yeah.
adapting to those differences that exist within the community. So going then, because you did mention about the fact that Vanuatu, it were the people kind of like looked more like you felt like you blended in those communities. When you then came and you said that you were at the end of primary school and you were going into secondary school, how was that adaptation for you then? And how has that influenced kind of like what you'll want to do going forward?
Yeah. So the primary school I went to, in my class, there were a few um Black children from Indian origin. So I didn't feel too sticky outy like a sore thumb. Um, but it was again different because it's a new environment. I've not, you know, I came into end of year 5, beginning of year 6. You're about to do your SATs, you're about to exams, so you know, fall into line academically. And I think because of that, like, oh, am I going to make friends? Am I going to adjust? I became more academic. And then when I went to secondary school, it was an opportunity to almost like reinvent yourself because everybody's going through this big transition. You know, you're going to year 7, everybody's from different schools. The school I went to in Brent, very diverse, um, St. Gregory's Science College. And, you know, I didn't feel like a sore thumb. I didn't feel like I stuck out. I guess it was just adjusting to the new academics and engaging.
You said earlier on about when your experience in Vanuatu, which kind of like helped you to just have that island mentality, you know, and it's all good, it's all good. Do you think that kind of like helped you when you came here to say, well, you know what, it's all good, we can find a nice way around this? I don't know. Do you think that was part of what was playing on you at the same time as well?
I think so, because I think it's that trying to build that resilience and adjusting to whatever is coming your way. I mean, you've moved in a fairly short space of time, you know, people are different, talk different, getting used to accents, because in Vanuatu we're speaking Pidgin, English, and a little bit of French as well. And then here there's, you know, gradations of different accents. So in the area of London, of Northwest London that we lived in, you know, there was the ends sound, and then there was you listen to the BBC and it's more received pronunciation and all those things. So you just become, okay, this is it. People are different. Let's roll with it. You know, let's adjust.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So moving on, what was it that kind of like excited you at school, and you went on to do your degrees, etc.? What was the passion which was driving you then? What was your passion?
I mean, at school, I think I was fairly bookish. I did so I did my year 7 to year 9, and then I did my GCSEs, and I did quite well in my GCSEs, and then I did my A levels in maths, economics, chemistry, and religious studies. And then I wanted to do something quite broad, because I'm very inspired by my faith and being someone of service and being as constructive as possible. And so I decided, rather than go down the science route, I would go study economics and politics. So partly inspired by what was going on at the time. I think we'd just come out from the 2008 financial crash. Things were sticky in the UK. The austerity years were beginning in 2010, and by the time I was going to uni. And so I always thought I'd like to do something where I'm of service. And I think since then, even the stuff I've done, like extracurricular, I've been trying to, can I make something better? Or can I contribute to a mission or a vision where I feel like we're making an improvement to improve for society? Because coming from Kenya, you do see the extreme of poverty where people don't know where food is going to come from. I'm not to say it doesn't exist here. Here, you know, it's funny because when I've had family visit from Kenya, they're like, oh, you wouldn't know there's homeless people in London. But the media is so good at portraying one image abroad. And in the same way here, you know, you'd see the adverts of UNICEF, you know, all the charities of like the starving child in Africa, or, you know, it's so destitute. Yes, there are people who are in those situations. It's very unfortunate, but there's also more to it. So I think coming back to what drives me, my passion is trying to make a difference. And I think trying to include more people. Because I've also seen, even in this country, you know, there are people who don't get maybe what they need and are not supported in the way that they should be supported.
This notion or this statement keeps coming back: be of service, someone of service. And you also mentioned about your faith. The two sound like they're intertwined together. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah. So my name Consolata, the root is partly from the word consolation, which means to console or support. And I tried to also live up to that. You know, I'm a Christian, and in the Bible, you know, we're taught that Jesus came to serve and to be a servant to many. And, you know, it's not about riches and glory, you know, think earthly riches and glory. It's about how can you help people? How can you be like the Good Samaritan? And not to say I don't work or support people who are not of my faith. No, I don't believe that. And there's also lots to learn from other faiths. I think there's something about working together for the good of humanity. And I get that a lot from, you know, try and focus on higher ideals. Yes, there are things that we can always discuss and understand different perspectives, but it's trying to work together to improve and again, back to the service word, make things better for
Mhm.
whoever's coming after.
So it's, I like the way in which you mentioned about the fact of the connection, about kind of effectively looking out for other people. Yeah. And that you've witnessed firsthand from when you were in Kenya, even when you're in Vanuatu, those kind of like inequalities which exists within society. So
Yeah.
one of the things I noticed is that like you champion ideas around social mobility and stuff like that. Can you give us a little glimpse as to how you go about doing that and how you would encourage other people to do that?
Sure. So a few years ago, when I was at uni, I was involved in a program, supporting. So I studied at Sussex, and Brighton is a wealthy city, but it's also a city with lots of deprivation and actually some of the lower scores in terms of people progressing, not just to higher education or doing different things. And one of the things I did was work as a ambassador or a student volunteer, however you describe it, trying to raise aspirations. Because one of the things the data has shown is, if you don't see something most times or are told you can be something else, you'll most likely end up being what you see. So lots of kids in the community from very poor backgrounds would be, if their family had always worked in a chip shop, that would be the ambition. I'm not to say working in a chip shop's not great, I love fish and chips, but it's that thing of, if they've not seen anything else, that's what people would want to be. So working as an ambassador and talking to kids and working with them and trying to raise aspirations. We do tours on campus and talk to them about, because at the time was also when the £9,000 fees coming in.
Right.
That's we were the first year that came in, and I think trying to explain even to parents that yes, students are paying £9,000 in fees. It's not ideal, but there's a lot of support from universities and from the government. Some people are like, I don't have £9,000, I won't be able to pay. You're not going to uni, therefore, you're going to have to get a job and start working. But if the child would have wanted to maybe think of a different future or do something different, unless you expose them to that, they wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
So engaging in stuff like that and was really beneficial. Also mentoring. I've done a bit of mentoring in the past, and it's just talking to young people and trying to get them to see there is more that's out there. And it's not just limited to the youth. So in my local area, the group of churches volunteer every year to do a Christmas lunch for the elderly. One of the things I realized is, and my mum keeps saying this, being an elderly person in the UK, depending on your family structure or the social structures around you, can be very hard.
Yeah.
So I volunteered one Christmas, and it was eye-opening to see that for a lot of older people, their families might not visit them because, they live too far or they can't come down for Christmas or whatever it is. And it's supposed to be the happiest time of the year. But there are these older people who all they want is just to be around people.
Yeah.
So one of my highlights every Christmas when I can is to volunteer for the Christmas lunch. Because you talk to the older people and they're just so happy they have people around them. And it makes me think, back in Kenya, being elderly is revered. Whereas here, it's almost people feel, oh my God, I'm old, I can't go out, I'm struggling. And it's a very weird thing. And I felt like, because my grandparents aren't here, if I can be there for somebody else's grandparent, then that's also a good thing. And it does warm your heart a little bit. And then like, this is the most exciting day, and then dressed to the nines and watching the Queen's speech and things like that. So it's the simple things, but you can't overlook the simple things about, it's about engaging with people, talking to people. And of course the ages as well, which I think is really important.
One of the things that you were saying there was about like the community and
Mm.
the impact on the community. And
Yeah.
I was just thinking, in terms of the community that you had in Kenya,
Mm.
compared to the community that you were just describing about, like even just going to, do you sense that that something's being lost? You talked about elderly people being revered in wisdom and associating with that. Do you think that we've lost that? Do you think that this country is kind of like out of tune or out of step with I don't know, I might be putting you on the spot here, but from
I think it's a fairly fair question. I mean, for one thing, yes, I understand why care homes exist, for example. You know, you might not have the capacity to provide care for family members or, you know, extended family when they need certain things that, you know, when you're older, you're a bit weaker. Not fully weak, but you're a bit weaker. In Kenya, but this is also changing, you know, with projections and ideals of the West, where care homes don't really exist. You take care of the family member together as a community, you all pitch in. I know my mum makes a joke, oh, I'd never want to retire here or get old here because I'm just going to be put in a care home. But, and it's not to say care homes are bad places, but it's just thinking about how you go back, I guess, to the, I don't want to say old days because that's going to sound not correct,
Yeah.
but where the care is centered, and if the family can provide it, great, but also making sure, you know, that people are looked after, because you know, you hear of people being almost neglected. And I know this, it could be either the sensationalization of specific stories where you hear somebody, oh, you know, they've been in their house and nobody's checked in on them for like a year and they died a year ago, you know, which is really unfortunate to think that you can die alone when you may have family or children or whoever else. So I think that bit has definitely been lost. I think as we become more focused maybe on the digital, we're forgetting that digital first is not inclusive. We've got to also, you know, meet people where they are. Simple things that are really, they could be talked about as changes generally, but even things like the lack of, or bank branches closing down. Yes, banks have to save on costs, but a lot of older people rely on going in. You know, they might get dressed really early in the morning, dressed to the nines, because it's the first conversation they're going to have with somebody for a while. You hear of people going to supermarket every day because they've not had anybody to talk to. So I think there are some elements of the basics that we are missing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to be done. And I'm not to say that it's all the answer of politicians or the political system. Yes, there are systems and structures that need to be improved and made better, but we're missing that community thing. I think it was definitely there throughout the pandemic, and we need to try and make sure that's not lost, where, you know, people are looking out for each other, volunteering, running to get shopping for people, small things like that you know, make a whole world of a difference.
There was something which resonated with me as you were saying about checking in on people, and no one should effectively die alone, because I heard yesterday on the news of someone who had died 2.5 years and living in, and nobody had, not even the landlord had checked on it. And it's kind of like, how could that happen?
Yeah. You know, as long as maybe the money was leaving the account, and until they weren't paying, it's like, oh, I've not got my money. Like, is everything, where's my money? And I'm not saying that's the first instinct.
But
it does make you think.
And I just thought to myself, in terms of community spirits, how we develop communities, I suppose, is the question that we're looking for, because community also has that sense of belonging, that sense of identity, that sense of who we are as individuals.
Yeah.
So how do we work together to build better community?
I think that's a very important question.
Mhm.
It's not one that can be answered fairly
No, no,
simplistically either.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm not putting you on the spot here because like, I'm not
No.
expecting you.
It's okay. I can attempt to answer it. I think from some of the work I've been doing, looking at in process improvement, change, I think there's three things. So there's people. So you start with people, you know, engage with people, talk to them, listen to them. I mean, I know we had the census last year, and I thought that was quite, personally, I found it quite exciting because you get to hear lots of different things. And yes, the data started coming out instead of building a true picture of the population. And also you can start to see what will be needed for the future. So I think it starts with the people. And then I think personally, I think it comes down to systems, you know, what systems do we have in place? I think, you know, the NHS is, yes, there are things that need to be fixed, but it is an institution, for example, that it works well, you know. Even some of the social care systems and ways of providing for people who might not be able to provide, you know, looking for those who are marginalized in society. And then I think it comes down to processes. What processes do you have in place? So people, systems, processes. So in the transformation world, you know, they talk about people, processes, then systems. But I think if you make that bigger, it starts with people, yes, then systems, then processes. Because if you have a system that's designed to, I don't say make you fail, but not make you achieve or do what you can to your best ability. It doesn't matter what the processes are because the failure is with the system. So if you can fix the system and improve and make it better for more people, then and then work on the processes, then you can make a real difference.
I love that answer, Consolata. I think it's very insightful. I do like the way how you challenge the idea of the system, the importance of the system, and the way that the system impacts on the processes which feed into the system. Yeah. So if the system is broken, the processes are automatically broken.
Yeah. And you can't start by saying, oh, let me fix the processes, because you can fix the processes and make them shiny. You can make them great. But if the underlying system is not fit for purpose, you know, and I'm not talking just about, you know, technology. I think even, I mean, systems in terms of the laws and the structures that we have, the institutions that we have, if they're not made better, it doesn't matter what they try and do, because it's almost just sticking a plaster and, you know, on something that doesn't require plaster. It requires like surgery and like, you know, a cast.
Yeah.
You know, to use the medical terminology.
Yeah. My kind of like one of my final questions, because just based on what how do you think that culture then feeds into this process people systems and process systems people? How do you think culture feeds in and interferes with that?
Well, first, I think there's an element of accepting that, especially in the, and I've recognized I've got very London centric views, and this may not be the same across the UK or beyond. I think there has to be something about recognizing there are elements of different cultures that do add value, and every culture does things differently. There are some things in all cultures that are probably not great, and there's other things that are better. I think by recognizing that, but then I think also coming down to looking at the core elements of humanity, you know, you want to have shelter, you want to have food, you want to have purpose, and purpose can be either in what you're doing or who you're working with or whatever. And if you have those things in place, then everybody can then find ways to add value to the world in whichever way they think makes sense for most of them. So I think going back to your question, I think culture is really important, and we can't let it go. And having people of different cultures is also very beneficial, because it's that sharing learning, sharing knowledge. And if you understand someone's culture or different cultures, you can then relate better. For one thing, I know that, yes, for using something simple as language, yes, language can be difficult to learn, but you notice if you go to a different country and you at least even attempt to try and speak a few words in a language, people are, oh my gosh, you're trying. Oh, they're a bit more receptive.
Mhm.
Whereas if you do maybe, I don't want to say stereotypical British thing and just say no, and then just say I speak English only,
Mhm.
it's probably not the most helpful thing, because if someone or whoever it is from another country doesn't speak English, you've then almost like closed off that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas at least if there's an attempt, I think it's also recognizing there is no one size fits all or one answer to everything. I think sometimes in the West, wherever we are, and whether through media or what we do, you can always think, oh, this is the way things always are. But actually, by learning from different cultures, you can appreciate that people do things differently, and you could learn something from them.
Yeah, definitely. Consolata, I'm going to ask you one final question, right? Looking back at your life and whatever else, you're still very young anyhow, right? But what advice would you have given to your I'm gonna change the question for you, Consolata. I heard a question yesterday and I thought I'm gonna steal this one and try it. And it says, looking back, and imagine your 8-year-old self. If your 8-year-old self was looking at you now, what would be the wow factor that you think they would say, oh, yes, I always wanted to be able to do that? What would that be for you?
Oh my gosh. Very good question. Very difficult.
It was a new question. I might have to just ditch this one, go back to my original. But
no. It's a good question. I think, well, the wow would be, oh my gosh, you're somewhere different. Your life turned out very different from what you expected. And I think it's that thing of being exposed to different things. I think there was a saying from, I think, when Theresa May was Prime Minister, where it was like, there's no citizens of nowhere, or there's no citizens of the world. But I think because we are so interconnected now, it's very difficult to say you're not influenced by other things. So, the fact that, we left Vanuatu, that wasn't my decision. That was my parents' decision. We left Kenya, went to Vanuatu. We then left Vanuatu, came to the UK. Staying in the UK or the latter years has been my decision. I've built my friendships, my immediate family still here. Global connections are still, COVID notwithstanding, can still travel fairly easily and get to places, and with the internet and even things like Zoom and connecting with people. So I think 8-year-old me would be quite shocked, be like, I didn't know that's where you'd be, but you're still trying, so that's good. You're still persevering, so that's good. I guess just keep going. And I think sometimes you can underestimate that, if you try and look back at your 8-year-old self, you're probably at 8, you're concerned, oh, what my friend's doing, what's going on, what's on TV. But I guess looking forward now, I think things are okay. They're progressing how they should do. And the other thing is, there's no 100% right answer. This is how it's going to turn out. Everything is very different. And there's a saying, I think, in the Christian faith or even the Quran, I think, that says you can make a plan, but God laughs and it doesn't matter. So I think it's just being or developing that resilience and adjusting
Mhm.
to whatever's going to come.
Fantastic. Consolata, I want to just say a really big thank you for being our guest on Belonging today. It's been a real treat, right? I've learned so much. I love your ideas about people, systems and processes, about being someone of service. Yeah, I think if more of us were people of service, the place would be much better. But we can just continue to do our service and hope other people will come on board and serve with us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's really a big thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate
no, it's been my pleasure. It really has. I'm going to just quickly share what's going to be happening next week. And so next week we've got Professor Zeng, and she is the pro-consul and professor and director of the graduate school, and she's going to be with us from 12:30 next week. So just if you haven't seen any of the other editions of Belonging, please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, where you'll be able to see those episodes. And if you're wanting to have a look at some of the highlights, then just take a quick look at some of the Belonging stories here in this little article. But what I'd like to just say is just once again, thank you. And we want to just say, keep belonging. So take care until next week. And bye-bye.